Welcome, everybody. This is Walk the Walk, creating and sustaining diverse startup teams. I am very, very excited about today's session. More to come in a little bit, but before, I want to introduce myself. My name is Anya Leman, Innovation Director at Ascender. If this is your first time at one of our Ascender events, welcome, and I hope to see you again. If this is not, just welcome back again. Ascender is Pittsburgh's community for entrepreneurs. We offer educational programs, mentorship, expert coaching, business incubation, and run an entrepreneur-focused co-working space near Bakery Square. You can check more about what we do, all of the programs that we offer, and also our space in our website. So just make sure that you can add a note to yourself to check out Ascender's website to learn more about us. I wanted to just start with, so today's event is a very special one. This is one event that we wanted to coordinate to celebrate the National Hispanic Heritage Month, which runs from September 15 to October 15. As you all may know, this month honors and the cultures and contribution of both Hispanic and Latinx Americans across the U.S. So here in Pittsburgh, we wanted to make sure that we did that, we acknowledged that. Besides today's event, our team will be leading a co-design session during the 2021 Latinx Connect conference by the University of Pittsburgh. This conference goes from October 14th to the 16th. Ascender session will be on October 16th. We will be sharing the link there so that you can check it out, register, and most importantly, register to our session. Our session is going to explore actionable ways to support the next generation of Latinx founders and entrepreneurs. So more to come on that. So as I said earlier, I am very excited and honored to have our guest speaker today. I actually met Oscar a long time ago at Latinx Startup Weekend in New York City, and now we meet again in the Ascender virtual space. So Oscar is the co-founder and partner of Fulcrum Public Affairs, the only 100% Black and Hispanic-owned federal government relations firm in DC. Oscar is a busy man, and he has been recognized by many publications, including being the 2020 top lobbyist by the National Institute for Lobbyists and Ethics, and one of DC's top lobbyists by The Hill. He has also been recognized as as an influential mover and shaker under 40 by the Washington Life magazine. So there is a lot to learn from Oscar, and that's why we brought him today in our virtual space. And without further ado, Oscar, why don't we get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself, and then feel free to jump into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Anya and Ben. Yeah, so I always have to say that the top 40 under 40 was a few years ago, so I am technically not under 40 anymore. Although I'm going to keep that up there.
Accomplishment.
Yeah. So people, I think people will, for the next 20 years, hopefully think I'm under 40. But so I'm going to start a little bit by telling you what I do. But if anybody has any questions, sometimes I get into a little bit of DC political speak, and some of the terminology I use, maybe people don't know. So maybe if you have any questions, any bigger questions at the end, if you have any questions in terms of what I said, if you don't understand it, then just maybe put it in the chat, and maybe Anya can get my attention on that. But so again, as Anya said, my name is Oscar Ramirez. I am a Democratic lobbyist. I'm a Democrat. Our firm represents Fortune 100 companies, nonprofits, startups. And I've been lobbying for about 12 years, and our firm is about 2.5 years old now. We're hired to advocate for our clients with policymakers. That means Congress, the White House, cabinet agencies, and to a lesser extent, state and local elected officials. So if a client wants a policy change or doesn't want a policy change to happen, they hire us. So if you're a company like Google and you're afraid that the government's going to do something that might cost you, $20 billion, you'd rather pay us a lesser amount than that to make sure that that doesn't happen. So, and a lot of our work is in the tech space, financial services space, and healthcare. So what we do is we add different things to what they already do in Washington, D.C. We add issue expertise, so it could be things like antitrust or privacy. We add a relationship, so we know people sometimes better than they know them in terms of the policymakers. We also add strategy, because we understand who the policymakers are, where they come from, what's important to them, we're sometimes able to add things to these big companies that they don't know themselves. We mostly do advocacy work, like as I mentioned, try to influence policy with policymakers. But in some cases, like JP Morgan Chase, for example, is one of our clients, and we don't really advocate too much on their policy issues. They just want to know what's happening in Washington, and then their DC office will then transmit that to where I'm at right now in New York. So unlike other professions, like if you're a doctor, you need to go to medical school. If you are a lawyer, you need to go to law school. If you're a lobbyist, you don't really need that. It's not about like the school you went to or what grades you have or the graduate degrees you have. I would say lobbying is about three things. One, it's about, thank you for that. Lobbying is about what I call inside experience. That means having worked in Congress or as an appointee of the administration, working for government. For me, that's like getting a college degree. It's foundation for everything else that we do. We know the players and we know the process. And in fact, when I talk to young professionals who are coming to DC for the first time, if they want to do policy and political work, I always discourage them from getting graduate degrees because I think their time is better spent working in DC and getting the hands-on experience. So one is inside experience. Two is relationships. The people that we know move the ball forward for us. Sometimes it's, these members of Congress, these Hill staffers have a lot of things on their plate, a lot of priorities, a lot of issues that are moving through. It can be healthcare, climate change, maybe there's a war going on somewhere. So the relationships that we have will help us get our issues to the front of the line. So they will pay attention to us in a way that they might not to others because we have those relationships. And they'll also provide you, as I mentioned, some clients just want intel. So they'll provide us with information on what's happening, things that are not necessarily public. And in Washington, DC, they always say the currency of Washington is knowledge. Knowing what is happening and when is the most important thing you can know in Washington. So inside experience, relationships, and the third thing I would say is skill set. We give strategic advice on how to navigate Washington. So having experience working in government is usually required for that. But it's also understanding how to get from point A to point B. It's a chess match, and knowing what pieces to move and when is really important. So and then for me, like when I started my firm, one of the things that was very important is getting a big firm experience. I worked, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, at one of the larger Democratic firms. At that point, it was the largest Democratic firm for about 8 years. And if government experience is like getting a college degree, then working at a big firm for me was the equivalent of getting a law degree for a lawyer or medical degree for a doctor. And I worked there, as I mentioned, for 8 years. Before starting our own firm. And you see a lot of this in the tech space, where you'll see someone who works at Google for a few years, they learn the business, they learn the issues, they learn the people, and then they leave for their own startup. So that's essentially what I did by working at this large firm for several years. I learned what I needed to know at the highest levels, and I applied it elsewhere. And sometimes as I'm running my own firm, I always find myself repeating things that my former CEO would say to us on how to bring on business, how to retain clients, how to work a client. So the things that I learned, at the highest levels in some ways are things that I'm applying now at our own firm. But one of the challenges, I think this happens in many, many industries, one of the challenges for us in terms of working at a big firm is that that they have many restrictions on the type of work you can do afterwards. So many of these firms have non-compete agreements, non-solicit restrictions. And so that means if I worked on several clients at our old firm, when I went to start my own firm, I couldn't work for them for a year. I couldn't ask them to work with them for a year. So that's a huge impediment when a lot of people want to start their own business because they're limited in terms of the people who know them best, the clients who know them best aren't able to work with them. So I got a little bit fortunate on that end because the firm I was at for 8 years ended up having issues. If you Google Podesta Group in Russia, you'll see what issues I'm talking about. So the firm imploded. So because of that, there was nobody at the firm to enforce these non-solicitation and non-compete agreements. So we were able to, when people left the firm, they were able to take any clients they wanted with them, which usually doesn't happen. The next component in terms of kind of the work I do is finding what I call a work husband. So my partner, Dana Thompson, and I, probably known each other for about 15 years now. He's African American. And some people, find it easier to do a startup by themselves. For me, my personality is one, I'm better working as part of a team. I like bouncing ideas off people. I like, splitting up responsibilities. People do have certain strengths, certain weaknesses. And I prefer to do what I do well and then have somebody else do what they do well. So having somebody who brought something else to the table that I did was super important, not just in terms of getting the work done, but in terms of bringing on additional business. If I'm trying to bring on business myself, they're going to hire me for what I do. But if we have additional people who can do different things, have different skill sets, different relationships, they can, we could get hired for that as well. So. And then the third reason is it was a very practical reason for us in terms of starting our firm, is that so Dana and I, when we were at our old firm together, he was there for about 3 years. There were a handful of clients that we did about 80% of the work on. So my thinking when I approached Dana about starting our own firm was, look, if you do your thing and I do my thing, maybe I get 1 or 2 of those handful of clients, maybe you get 1 or 2 of those handful of clients, and maybe other firms, maybe those clients go to other, a couple of those go to other firms. But if we stay together and we've been doing work for them for a few years now, and they know our work and they trust us, if we stay together, there's a pretty good shot they're going to stay with us. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what ended up happening. So we went together and we started off with kind of the handful of clients because they were comfortable with the work that we were doing. And with Dana, one of the things that was good is that we have very complementary skill sets. Some of it was like I mentioned, was intentional because we knew each other and we worked well together for a period of 2-3 years. But the other part we didn't know. We just got very lucky in that we have different skill sets. I do most of the business development. I'm the one that sells the firm to potential clients. I frame what we do well, what we offer the other firms don't, why they should hire us at a particular time. I oversee the client management. I make sure that our team, which is now about almost 10 people, is always doing the work they need to do to make sure our clients stay with us and are happy. That might be hiring additional people to fill certain holes that a client may need that we don't offer right now. Means anticipating what the future needs might be for our clients, so we're ready to fill that hole when it's needed. I'm also very organized. I'm a little OCD, so that is obviously very helpful in running a business. And then my partner has different skill sets. So our coworkers always say that he's the mom, I'm the dad. Maybe some stereotypical roles, but he's extremely thoughtful. He's on the people side of managing a firm. That's more of the role that he plays, making sure everybody's happy and everybody feels supported and everybody feels like they're contributing. He also has a lot of relationships, so he works a lot, does a lot of work for our clients, and he does bring on some business as well. And then the last part is, I always think about this because I'm a little bit more of the assertive personality between both of us. I'm a little bit more alpha than he is. So I always think, had I ended up working with somebody who was like me, we would have butted heads a lot because sometimes similar personalities don't get along as well. But we're very complementary in terms of our personalities as well. So when we left our firm, and this is maybe the next slide, when we left our firm, we actually got approached by a third person to help, who wanted us to join him to start a new firm. We were approached by, and they were in turn funded by a larger public affairs firm that would have been an investor firm. The good thing of that arrangement was that we had a safety net. Because we had this outside investor, we would always be paid a salary. We had the infrastructure of an office space, invoicing, payroll, healthcare. All the logistics of running a firm, which we had never done before, was taken care of. And if we had hypothetically brought on 0 clients, they would still pay us. So there was some security in having that kind of arrangement. The downside was that the larger firm owned 45% of that firm. And the third guy who had negotiated this arrangement owned another 45%, although he was going to give some of that to additional people we brought on. And my partner and I, Dana and I, own 5% each. So now usually in our business, somebody owns a firm or a couple of people own a firm and nobody else owns equity. For us, having 5% equity was more than we had before. But it became pretty clear that wasn't a good arrangement for us. Dana and I were bringing on all the business and we were doing all the work. So it didn't make sense for us to, do 90% of the work and 90% of the business and only own 10% of the firm. So we hired a lawyer and we got out of that arrangement within the first year. So within about 9 or 10 months. So even though that first year was not the smoothest of experiences, we did learn a lot. One thing we learned is how easy it is, especially today, to contract out to others, to have them do what they do well so that we can focus on, especially at the beginning, on doing the work for our clients and bringing on an additional business. And with a new firm, we wanted 100% to focus on growing as fast as we could. So that meant everything from the first place we worked at was a place called the Yards, which was a shared space. So we didn't have to worry about signing a lease. We didn't have to worry about people to do cybersecurity for us. We didn't have to worry about any of the office logistics because they took care of everything. All we had to do was pay for our space. We hired a firm called Insperity, which that one-year firm had also used, and they do payroll, they do 401k, they do healthcare, so we never had to worry about that, and we still use them. They're a little pricey, but we can focus on what we do, and then we'll just contract with them, and they do the stuff that we don't have to worry about anymore. The next thing I did when we were going to do our own firm was I talked to a couple people who had started their own firms maybe about 10 years earlier. And they gave me a lot of good general advice about how to start a business, how to work a business. But one of the most important things they did for me was that they recommended different vendors that we could use. And so we hired one of their accountants. So we hired another one of their lawyers. The people who, kind of learning who does things well and who does it well for your type of business can take time. And instead of having to figure out who did that and interview people and maybe take a guess, we hired people who were doing it for similar firms. So that made our job easier as well. And the last thing when we tried to get our firm started was we needed to get bridge funding. So I had worked at the previous firm, as I mentioned, for 8 years at the big firm. Dana had worked there for 3 years. But I didn't and don't have children. And I had saved a lot of money over those 8 years. My partner had only been there for about 2.5 years and he had two children. So I was able to not get a paycheck for a while, and that was fine. He couldn't do that, and his wife didn't want him to do that. So and sometimes when you start a new firm, even if somebody says that they're going to hire you, it does take a period of time for their lawyers to sign the contract and make everything, kosher. It does take a period of time for the money to actually come in the door. And from my experience at the bigger firm I was at, sometimes they can take 3, 4, 5, and some clients pay 6 months late. So we knew it could be a period of time before we got a paycheck. So what we did was we took a line of credit, personal line of credit from a bank, $90,000 to make sure that we had money to pay for expenses that we had as a business, to pay for salaries, and that's often a huge obstacle for we weren't 22 years old starting a firm. We were a little bit older, so we had mortgages. As I mentioned, my partner had kids, so there were financial things we needed to pay for. So we needed that income, and had we not done a line of credit, it might have been difficult to do that. But because we knew we had clients coming in, and because we had done the work already for a period of time, it made it easier for us to assume that risk because we were fairly confident we could we could pay it off. You can turn to the next slide. There we go. So once we got the logistics of starting up our firm, we had to focus on obviously, growing the firm. And so much of the work that we do is focused on who the people are and what their experiences are. So my partner, as I mentioned, is African-American. As I think you can probably see, I'm Latino. And as Anya mentioned in the beginning, we're, shockingly, the only 100% Black, Brown-owned firm that does federal lobbying in the country. So that was a great hook for us in terms of bringing on business, and has been a big part of how we marketed ourselves, especially at the outset. And with that, with that background and those relationships comes a lot of expertise in working with policymakers that come from and represent those communities. And the Black and Brown elected officials are a big part of the Democratic Party in Washington, and they hold important positions in leadership and running different committees. So it was a good starting point for us in terms of like the work we were able to do. But one of the challenges with any minority-owned business in our space is that you tend to be pigeonholed. So while it was good that we had this expertise and these relationships in this niche, a lot of times, if you're a big company, you'll say, okay, they can only do this, or they do this well, let's hire somebody else to do other parts. So we were very conscious early on about not being pigeonholed into only being a Black, Brown firm. And the example that I always tell our clients is the firm we were at, the big firm we were at for several years, the person who started it was a gentleman named Tony Podesta, and his brother, John Podesta, started Center for American Progress. He was Bill Clinton's chief of staff and was, I think, a senior advisor to Barack Obama, so a very prominent political family. But he was Italian American. So what we'd always say is, when you hire the Podesta group, you don't say, well, the Podesta group can only work with Italian American members of Congress because he's Italian American. They never pigeonhole him in that way. And because of that, he was able to build a $50 million firm. So I would always say, look, if you're hiring the Podesta group to do many things, not just Italian American members of Congress, you can hire us to do additional work besides working with minority members of Congress. But we also have to have the capabilities of doing that kind of work. So we were very intentional when we were hiring people that we found people who could in some ways duplicate the work, because there was a lot of work in our space that we're doing, but also who could substantively add to the work we were doing and to help us be perceived in a much broader way. So our team, we're very fortunate, is 100% diverse in different ways in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender, but they also have issue expertise in areas that Dana and I didn't have. And don't have. So like, as I mentioned, some people may be privacy experts, some are antitrust experts, some are financial services experts, some are healthcare experts. And it was important for us to have people like that on our team because these clients would then say, well, they're not just doing Black, Brown things at this Black, Brown firm, but they're doing, they can offer much, much more. So that was something that we were very intentional at the very outset to make sure that, we didn't have a firm that was 4 or 5 years old and that was pigeonholed in a certain way. And instead that people saw us as a kind of a broader firm that could do many things. And kind of similarly, my partner and I worked in the House of Representatives, but we never worked in the Senate. So we hired people who had a Senate experience, who could do that. And then when we were hiring these people, we wanted to, besides where they came from and their issue expertise and their work histories, we also wanted to hire certain personality traits. So we wanted smart people, thoughtful people, strategic people, people who are self-starters, people who are organized, people who are well-networked. In our profession, and probably in most professions, those are the type of people who do best. And you can tell that because in some cases we worked with them in the past, but when you interview people, you really get a sense of how they think pretty quickly. And so when we spotted these skill sets, that we knew we wanted to bring on people like that. And the last thing in terms of like our branding is that, when a lot of people who do lobbying work start firms, first they tend to be limited in that they only, they won't grow that much. So they'll maybe have like 3, 4, or 5 clients, and they're happy with that. They'll keep on doing that. And then they will be called John Smith strategies. People always do that a lot, which is fine. But our intention at the very beginning was not to have it be Oscar Dana strategies. It was for us to build a big, a big firm, and we're, 2.5 years, we're between $5 and $6 million in revenue, and we'd love to be a $20+ million firm. So we call ourselves Fulcrum Public Affairs, and we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just about Oscar and Dana, it was about the team that we had, and the things that all of us as a firm could do, and not just about what Dana and I could do. But to have those, as I mentioned, the people that we brought as a new firm could be a little bit difficult, because these talented people were obviously in demand. There were bigger firms that had much more money than we did, especially at that time, that could pay them more, right? And they had bigger reputations and were more well known. So how do you get these talented, young, ambitious people to a small firm that's a 2-person firm at that point? So we did a few things. So one was we offer them the option of equity. So if for the first few people, not for the current people, but so if they brought on a certain dollar amount in business annually, then they would get a small percentage of equity. And that's something that big firms never do. You could have people with $2 million of business at a big firm and they won't have any equity. So for us, that was something that was an incentive, especially for young, ambitious people. They said, oh, well, look, if I bring on this business, I could have, maybe in the long run, I could make more money than I would at this bigger firm. So the equity option was something that was very important for us in hiring some of these talented people early on. The other thing that we always sold to them was that they would have a better opportunity to build their own brand at a small firm. When you're at a big firm, you get lost in the shuffle. Sometimes you might have a governor who's working at the firm as a partner, and then a 35-year-old who goes to that firm ends up being the assistant to the governor, and it's all about the governor. As I said, for us, I was like, we don't want it to be the Oscar Dana show. We want to have people who build their own brands, who have their own reputations, and that will be another part of the firm. So if they wanted to do that, they would have a better shot doing it with us than they would at a big firm. The other thing is on the people side is that we offered most of the people that we've hired have been women, so we've offered 4 months paid maternity leave. Most firms like ours usually offer 2. So and again, most of the people that we've hired have been 30 to 35, so they're starting to think about that. And that was something that we knew that one was the right thing to do, but also was something that we knew would give us a competitive advantage versus some of these bigger firms that weren't as generous in that regard. And the last thing, people always say nice guys finish last, but is that my partner and I think are very nice people and easy to work with. We're definitely not crazy, and that was something that in like a lot of professions, especially in ours, you have a lot of crazy people running around, and that are very difficult to work for and work with. So the fact that people knew us as nice people was a bonus for them, because they knew that they would be happy going into work day in, day out, and they wouldn't be terrorized by somebody who was throwing telephones at them. Okay, can we switch to the next slide? Okay, so we had our team in place. So how do we build a company? So we did a few things. So one is we focus a lot on kind of, as I mentioned earlier, on branding the firm and self-promotion. So we wanted to let people know that we existed. 2-person firm in a very busy time sometimes doesn't get a lot of attention. So we work with the DC press that covers politics and policy to get press hits. When we hired somebody, we got a hit. When we brought on new clients, especially brand name clients, we got a hit. And I'm one of those people that talks to press a lot on background on a variety of issues. So I'm helpful to them on the work that they need to do. So when I need them to be helpful for me, they often return the favor. We also organize a lot of formal and informal events. So we organized a lot of panel discussions back when people were doing stuff in person on a variety of issues, so that we could get some visibility and talk about the issues that we knew well. Webinars. We also did a lot of informal events. So we did a lot of receptions where we would have at our shared space, we'd have 150 people on our rooftop, with including Hill staff, members of Congress, our clients. And so just create a little bit of buzz of people say, oh, these guys are, we know who they are. People tend to gravitate towards success. So we wanted them to wanted to have this image that they would want to work with us. And one of the other things we did is we looked at our internal capabilities and made sure we marketed what we did appropriately. We wanted to tell potential clients what we did that was unique and why they should hire us versus somebody else. So part of that, as I mentioned, was engaging communities of color. So that was, kind of like our strength at the very beginning. But we also said we'd offer personalized services. When you're at a big firm, you can get lost. If you're a client that pays $10,000 to $15,000 a month, maybe they don't pay as much attention to you as a client that pays them $30,000 a month. So with a small firm, we could really give them a lot of attention that maybe they don't get from big firms. And then we were very clear in terms of what we did. So we always say we do 4 buckets of things. 1, we do federal lobbying. 2, we do stakeholder engagement and coalition building. 3, we do state local advocacy, and the 4th, we do some political work. So, for example, I would say this a lot, but the Democratic National Convention and the DNC and the Democratic National Convention and the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, they both hired one firm this last cycle to do work for them, and that both firms were us. So again, that kind of client gives you a lot of credibility as well in the political space. But so we would always say that we can do those 4 things, and you have again, the federal, the stakeholder, the state, local, and the political, and you have very few large firms that do all those things. So the fact that we could bring in kind of the attention that you get from a small firm and then offer clients those array of services, I think was very unique. And then, so once we started that, we were, as I have here on the slide, we were building a plane while we were flying it. One of the things that I learned from the firm that I was at for a year was on the business side. So the one thing I noticed from some of our spreadsheets that we had there was that, firms like ours, usually the owners net about 60% of what they bring in once you subtract all expenses, payroll, including your own payroll. So that was helpful for us because we knew that our cumulative expenses would always be about 40%. So while you want to hire people, whenever you need help or when you have somebody that's good, that's available, we always try to keep to that number where once we got to, or we knew a certain amount of business was coming in, and then we knew we could hire somebody and still stay at that 40% expense range, we knew we basically, it was a trigger for us to be able to hire somebody. So that was on the business side, that was one of the first things that was helpful to us because we had no idea what the number was before that. That's not something that people tell you when you're working for somebody. The second thing is we reinvested a lot in ourselves very, very early. So I would always think about it in terms of the Netflix model. Netflix makes money and they would reinvest immediately in buying content so they could grow and make more money. They don't sit on it. So when we started making money early, we didn't say, okay, let's pocket the money and let's go and buy a new car and go on a nice trip. They said, let's reinvest it in a firm. So we use it to make sure we had good vendors, to make sure that we hired really talented people so that we could grow more. And that's exactly what ended up happening for us, so which was good. And the last thing is we had a little bit of luck on the way. And timing in our business and in life is if not everything, almost everything. So for us, what ended up, as I mentioned, we're a Democratic firm. So what was helpful for us was the 2018 and 2020 elections. In 2018, Democrats took back the House of Representatives, and in 2020, we took back, as you know, the White House and the Senate. So all of a sudden, all these companies are looking to hire additional Democratic firms. So that was something we didn't control, but we knew there was a good chance that was going to happen. So what we wanted to do, what we could control, was that we needed to be ready for those things to happen. So in advance of the election in 2020, we wanted to make sure we had, as many people as we could afford in place to do as many different things as possible, so that when people were ready to make those new hires, it wasn't just me and Dana that they were looking at. It was like, hey, this is a big team. We're bringing 5-6 people to every pitch that we're doing for potential clients. So we knew it gave us something to be ready for if it happened. Although obviously we didn't control the election results, it ended up going for us the right way. The last thing I would say in terms of building the company is what they always say is all good press is all press is good press. Like I mentioned earlier, we did a lot of earned media by getting quoted in things. We had, there's some magazines that have bio pieces on us. We work with reporters on background to give them the help they needed. And once Democrats took the House in 2018 and buying the White House, they always came. As I mentioned, I worked in the Obama administration, so they started quoting Obama administration alum all the time on what Biden would do. So I did a ton of webinars and a lot of press right after the election last year, which gave us a lot of visibility because potential clients say, like, okay, look, they know the people who are coming into this next administration, we should hire them. And the last thing is, while compared to maybe some retail companies, we're not super active compared to firms like ours. We're pretty active in the social media space. A lot of firms that are competitors don't even have social media presence, and while ours is small for 2+ year firm, we're still a little bit more active than others are, which has been a helpful thing for us. Can we turn to the next slide? All right, so when we kind of look at the things that we've learned along the way, I would say just a few things here. So one, when you're starting something, we're really drinking out of the fire hose. So one is to outsource and delegate as much non-essential stuff as you can. Dana and I wanted our time to be spent on doing what we do best and spending it on ways that help us retain the business and expand the business. And if we were looking at spreadsheets 6 hours a day, we would lose our business and we wouldn't have time to bring on more business. And that was the most important thing early on, is for people to say, wow, these guys are growing really fast. And we've been quoted a lot in different DC publications about one of the fastest growing lobby shops in DC, one of the best firms best positioned to do well in the Biden administration. So, but that happens because you're growing. And so we wanted to make sure that we focus our time on client retention and client expansion. Two, I would say credibility really matters. So that happened for us with having brand name clients. So when we started in the first quarter of 2019, we had Google, we had T-Mobile, we had Airbnb, we had Lyft. So it was clients that and companies that people knew. So if we had been a small firm with 3 or 4 clients and nobody had ever heard of, if you're JP Morgan Chase, you'd be like, okay, I don't know who these guys are they any good? But if Google's hiring you and Airbnb and Lyft and these other clients are hiring you, they're like, okay, these guys have to be legit because these other clients wouldn't have hired them otherwise. So one, starting with brand name clients gave us a lot of credibility. Two is, as I mentioned, Dana and I worked in the Podesta group. And so we knew how to do our work. And we had, in my case, 8 years, in his case, 3 years of experience servicing clients. So the people in DC who work at these companies knew that we were good at what we do. So we had, in addition to our brand name credibility, we had personal credibility for the work we do. And the last thing is we wanted to hire people who are very well respected. So we often went to our clients and say, hey, we're looking for a tech person. Who should we hire on tech to handle tech issues? So we wanted people that, again, we have 2 people who are as good as it gets on privacy and antitrust work in DC. So we wanted to make sure that our credibility was not limited to what Dana and I could do, but went along with some of the other people that we hired. The third thing is I always think about it in terms of dominoes. Momentum is such a big thing in life, in sports and in business, and it's hard to get and even harder to maintain sometimes. But for us, we wanted to get big wins under our belt early. So we wanted to hire really good people early. We wanted to get really good clients early. We wanted to get a lot of press early. So that buzz is something that when people would say, oh, I hear great things about you guys, even if they don't know exactly what we do, having that kind of feedback from people and that kind of perception from people, as Andre Agassi used to say, image is everything, and it may not be everything, but it's a lot in business. I always think there's kind of like a bandwagon mentality that people, if people think you're doing well, they want to be associated with you. So we wanted to make sure that early on that was the perception that people had of us. The next thing is that more success in my professional life and my personal life here, but who you're married to matters. I guess mentioned Dana and I fit very well. Personalities, the roles we play, he's I think I'm a nice guy too, but he's a nice guy, the very thoughtful, nice guy who manages people well. I do more on the business side. And so that the fit that we had was very fortunate because we both know our roles and we both know what we do well and we complement each other. And I could have never done this without him and vice versa. So So that partnership has been a very good one. And the last one I'd say is, in terms of managing a startup, is you always learn as you go, from business development to hiring people to the business of running a company. For me, I always understood that I and we would make mistakes along the way. That was just natural. We had never done this before. The important thing for us was to course correct very quickly when we did make a mistake, and to not repeat those mistakes. And there are very few things that are not insurmountable. So we knew that we wanted to just grow very quickly, and if we repeated any errors that we made, that we would have a good shot at that. So that is all I have, Anya. Turn it over back to you.
Thank you so much, Oscar, for prepping so many great tips and best practices. I have enjoyed just learning so much about it, but I want to provide some space for questions and answers. So if anybody here in the audience, wants to, go ahead and ask a question, feel free to do that right now.
I have a question. First of all, thanks, Oscar, for the presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and thanks, Anya, for organizing this. It is awesome. I was just curious, being a minority in Washington, how do you get your voice heard, especially with the political climate before the Biden election and all the chaos, like the riots earlier this year? How were you able to kind of still give voice to the minority, which I really value?
Yeah, so I tend to be a glass full guy. So I always think about it like, imagine the people who were doing this like 30 years ago, right? And when we had less of a voice, and that, and I always pay a lot of respect to the people because there were people who were doing it. They weren't able to get as big, or they weren't, because there was society and the real world was more limiting back then. So they really had it tough. For us, we're building on the work that others have done. So we're fortunate in that, as I mentioned, there are a lot of committee chairs who have a lot of power in Congress who are Black and brown. So that was an advantage for us because we help them and they help us. They wanted us to be successful. And we had a lot of people that we knew who approached us when they heard or read or about our firm, and they came up to us and said, how can we be helpful to you? How can we empower you? And that's one of my key words in life is empowerment. I don't think people know really enough how to do that. But so it's it goes both ways. So for us, we help them, they helped us. We created a pipeline. We have a lot of people we've hired who've been diverse different ways that we have helped place in different places, starting their careers. For us, it was about letting people know that we existed. And then once they did that, it kind of came more naturally for us to having people that we had known for a long time want to help us out. And if you're JP Morgan Chase, and they know that my partner Dana worked for Financial Services Committee Chairwoman Maxine Waters, that means something. And Maxine Waters would like if they hired us. That means something. So for us, it was about using all the resources at our disposal to make sure that we move the ball forward. And again, that was our old relationships. That was in terms of policymakers and clients and so on. So it wasn't as difficult as for us maybe as it might be for others. So I think some of the legwork that we put in over the years in terms of helping people out, came back and people were trying to help us out.
Oh, that's great. So you felt you were being listened to, because I guess my whole thing is the race relations in the U.S. have never been good, beginning with the founding of the country, because they pretty much just enslaved African Americans. So because this year, beginning of last year, just felt very much like the 1860s with Lincoln and the Civil War. So I guess I feel kind of happy that at least you're very optimistic, because I think some people would say, this year is kind of not so great. Maybe next year would be it could be even worse. I don't know. It seems like you still have faith in the government, even though it feels like a Wall Street government sometimes as well, after the crash of 2008 with the whole Lehman Brothers. Because even Chase, because Jamie Dimon was considered a hero until a little bit later. So he was one of the better banks, but still buying Bear wasn't necessarily the best strategy now that he's realizing. So I guess there's just a lot to unpack, but you seem pretty optimistic.
Yeah, no, and I'm in New York right now, but I was in DC last night, and we had a conversation with a few members of Congress about this. So much of it, again, it's how you view it in perspective. Like, they did pass, a bigger bill with, trillions, I can't remember, $2-3 trillion of funding earlier this year. There are a couple of things that are stuck right now, but they're going to come in the next couple of months. And when you look at what Congress and the president will pass in terms of assistance, in terms of aid, in terms of infrastructure, and all these different things, and you compare that, like you mentioned, 2009, this is like 3 or 4 times more than what we were able to do in 2009. So in terms of a dollar amount. So like, is it everything that's needed? No. Is it everything that we want? No. But when we look at it historically, this is a pretty amazing thing that, not yet, but what will happen over the course of this year, in terms of what we are, people who, not everybody agrees with it, but people who want those things, what we're able to do is pretty incredible. So I look at it that way in terms of what, again, it's not done yet. We're still, I think, a couple months away from finishing all that, but when we look at a dollar figure and how that money is being spent, it's more than, maybe whatever 90 years that's been done.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Julia. And Oscar, we have a question in the chat box, and it says, like, how do you charge your clients?
Good question. Good question. So we work different than law firms. There are law firms that do the work that we do. It's not, obviously they do legal work as well. So law firms charge by the 15 or 10-minute increment, the billable hours. We charge by retainer. So which makes it sometimes a little bit difficult because, if you're a big client like a Google, they'll pay you, and maybe some months a lot of work, some months you don't do as much work. But we do, as I mentioned, some work in the nonprofit space. Some of our nonprofit clients include organizations like Take Back the Court, which is trying to expand the Supreme Court, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, March of Dimes. So for them, they obviously are very passionate about the issues that they're hiring us for, but they're nonprofits, so they're not paying us as much as some of our corporate clients. So for them, the fact that we work on a retainer basis, they'll pay us X $1,000 a month. They'll sometimes blow through that number pretty quickly because they'll want us to do a lot of work, and so that's always something that we have to manage. But for us, the retainer thing makes it a lot easier because then some months you work more, some months you work less. But we know that the money coming in is consistent, and we don't. And it's to be honest with you, one of the things is like it's less time to keep track of. When we're at the Podesta Group at the big firm, we were on a retainer basis, but they asked us to keep time. And I literally, at the end of each month, I would spend 5 hours, so more than half a day, going through my emails, figuring out what I had done that month. And I'd rather have, like I said earlier, I'd rather have us focus on doing the work versus doing that logistical work.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay, well, think about them, but I do have a question, Oscar, that I'm very curious about. Can you speak a little bit more sort of like about mentorship? That, was that something that was prevalent in your life, and also just starting out, and even right now as a leader, you will be faced with difficult situations or conversations and things like that. Has that something that has been important to, to your professional development, both maybe professional and also personal?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, empowerment is something that's super important to me, and I'm a big believer in. I'm just by personality, I'm not a person who complains a lot about stuff, but I'm a person kind of taking action instead of complaining. And so mentorship is a huge part of empowerment. So you have different types of personality. So I am the eldest of 4 children, so I am definitely a better mentor than mentee. I have not had many. I've had a couple of mentors along the way, but I tend not to listen as well, which is, it's not a good thing. But I'm very good at mentoring other people. So so even when I was first in DC and I barely knew anything, I would mentor people who knew even less than I did. And now that I've been there a long time, and I know a lot more about how everything works and people and things like that, I made a big effort to mentor people, all along the way. So so a lot of that's in personal capacity. I always say the most important commodity I have is my time, and that's so if I'm spending 30 minutes to have a coffee with somebody or an hour to have drinks with somebody, that that's an opportunity cost, my personal side and professional side. So, but I take that seriously, and I know that, I've been in DC for, almost 2 decades now, and the people who I mentored 17 years ago are now successful people in their fields, and many of them are in turn paying that forward. So, I've seen the impact that has, because you help somebody, they help other people, and it really it makes a difference. So you do it in your personal level, but as I mentioned earlier, we also try to do it as a firm. So we've had a lot of fellows at our firm, and sometimes people are just out of college, and we had somebody, an African American college grad, a woman who is now with Senator Booker's office, but her first job after college is working for us. We have somebody who works for House Leadership, who had been in DC before, but she moved to California, then moved back, and she was looking for a job, and we knew she was good, so we hired her for 2 months until she could find a job. So on the professional level, we also are very proud of contributing and making sure that we're growing a pipeline.
Sounds good. All right. Any last minute questions?
Yeah, Oscar, can you talk a little bit more about the pipeline? I know hiring diverse workforce is important and integral to your firm, but I think a lot of people come back and say there isn't a pipeline out there. But I know you reject that idea, or you reject that as a reason. So can you speak more about that?
Yeah, you Googled one of the articles that I was quoted in, I think. Yeah, so I'm a big believer in that. So I mean, like, people will say, oh, there's no talent out there, and that's why we can't hire anybody. And in a certain extent, that's true, because if you're looking to hire people in the national security space, like, that's not full of people who are diverse, right? That's the reality. But I think a lot of people use that as an excuse because they either don't want to make the effort or don't know how to find people that are diverse and talented. And that's one of the things that we try to do, is to make sure that people not only help create a pipeline, but make sure a pipeline exists. So we actually have headhunter firms that are in charge of hiring. They're paid headhunters that hire. They're paid to find people to companies that companies can hire, and these headhunter firms, it's their job, come to us to look for diverse people. That's not our job. We're not headhunters, but we know that space. So they'll come to us, say, hey, we're looking for somebody who has X experience and who's diverse. Do you know somebody? And we'll send them like a few names. But the fact that they don't know who they are says a lot, right? So there really needs to be, I think, more of one is like, they need to hire people internally who know these people too, right? They can't just hope that we will help them in a free way. They need to pay money to make sure they have the expertise internally. But yeah, making the effort and having the right people who in those circles is super important to creating that pipeline. And for the most part, you can always find, people talk about the Rudy rule, Pittsburgh. You can find people that you can bring to the table to interview for things like that who are diverse.
Thank you so much for that, Oscar. And we only have a few more minutes left, but if you wanted to, share one part of advice for those that stayed, but also for the ones that will be watching this recording later, feel free to do that, and then we'll be done with the session.
Yeah, no, the one thing I would say in terms of starting a business is not be afraid to make that jump. So for me, I'd been thinking about doing this before my big firm ended for about 3-4 years. But you're getting paid well, you're comfortable, you're enjoying life, and sometimes that takes away the motivation to take a risk. So, and I, in a way, got fortunate that my old firm fell apart because I had no choice but to take that risk. But taking that risk was the best thing I ever did. From every angle, financially, from being in charge, from being able to make a difference in terms of like who we hire internally, vendors, interns, fellows. So I was forced into taking that risk, but if you really are passionate about something, you think you want to do something in a different way than maybe others do it, it's definitely and you're able to, in terms of your life, family, kids, mortgage, and you're able to do it.
All right. Thank you so much. This is, yeah, at a center, we definitely see a lot of that, every day. And it's really inspiring, just like people taking that jump and going for it. So thank you so much for your time, for giving back to the entrepreneurial community, Oscar. And I hope to see you again soon. Again, this session was recorded for the folks here, but also the ones that will be tuning in later. But, thank you and have a good day.